another and by others in their support system. As we celebrate the achievements of the candidates, it is only fitting that we recognize the various individuals who have directly supported our students who will be honored here tonight. Will all members of the graduate faculty, including the research advisors, please stand so that we can recognize you? Will all student colleagues, all lab and library mates, please stand? Will all parents, spouses, children, and other relatives please stand? Thank you all for your support. The various schools and the College of the University of Mississippi are headed by our academic deans, whom I now ask to stand as I call their names. Dr. Lee Cohen, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Dr. Alex Cheng, Dean of the School of Engineering, Dr. Ann Monroe, Assistant Dean of the School of Education, Dr. David Allen, Dean of the School of Pharmacy, Dr. Ken Syree, Dean of the School of Business Administration, Dr. Mark Wilder, Dean of the Patterson School of Accountancy, Dr. Velmer Burton, Dean of the School of Applied Sciences, and Dr. Tony Amater, Dean of General Studies and Associate Provost. I would also like to introduce other members of the platform party who serve as key officers of the university. Dr. Noel Wilkin, Interim Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. Dr. Josh Gladden, Interim Vice Chancellor for Research and Sponsored Programs. Dr. Brandy Hepner-LeBanc, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. Dr. Donna Strum, Associate Provost, and Dr. Richard Forget, Associate Provost. The other distinguished members of the platform party have roles later in the ceremony, and I will introduce them at that time. Please join me in welcoming our deans and senior administrators. Each year, the graduate school selects 2 outstanding doctoral candidates to serve as class marshals. This year, our marshals are Hannah Harris and Tim Colston. We now ask Hannah and Tim to come forward to give some brief remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Wyatt, and thank you to the administrators, faculty, staff of Ole Miss, and thank you all parents, relatives, and my fellow graduates. I'm honored to represent the graduate school and my peer as one of your class marshals. But first, I would also like to thank all of the mothers here today. This is truly your weekend, and none of us would be here without you. There are 2 mothers I must especially thank, my own mother, Joyce Colston, and my wife, Dr. Katia Colston. From the age of 4, my mother, more so than any other mentor in my life, encouraged and facilitated my love for the natural world. Even when that meant putting up with my bedroom full of snakes and other critters. All joking aside, she once found an escapee when putting away my laundry. And my wife, who's been my rock and persistent source of motivation. Both she and my daughter Madison have shown the utmost patience for my frequent absences, which often occur even when I'm home and working. All of us being hooded this evening are familiar with the challenges that graduate school presents, from the innumerable deadlines and the rat race of finding funding for our research and getting the next publication through peer review. It takes an incredibly patient family and group of friends to put up with you when it can be difficult to explain why you're always busy and rarely, if ever, stress-free. Currently, our country is facing trying and frightening times when it comes to scientific research, funding, and respect for higher education. It's our job as the next generation of researchers and scholars and educators that wherever we are, we must apply the skills we've gained from our years of study and engage in open dialogue with all members of our community and abolish the notion of the academic elite. We must reinforce that our country and its greatest institutions have been founded and flourished by encouraging and supporting innovation and revering the pursuit of knowledge. Our research and education system has been the model for the rest of the world, and we must ensure that it remains so. I've been fortunate to travel around the world representing our university as a researcher in 5 countries and 3 continents in my PhD studies. No matter where I was, whether it was a remote mountain in Ethiopia or the Amazonian jungle, I always knew that I was part of a community here in Oxford that supported me. In my time here, we've seen the university grow, achieving R1 status and expanding undergraduate enrollment without losing the feel of a small town and that sense of community which so attracted my family and I to move here. I'm sure my fellow graduates will agree that Oxford will always feel like the home to which we can return as welcome family members. Tonight, as we don our hoods, accept our diplomas, and make our way in the world, we must think back to our passions and the pursuit of knowledge which drove us to endure the countless hours of study, time in the lab or field, and remind ourselves that nothing is truly over until the moment you stop trying. Our dissertations may be complete, all the signatures signed, but as scholars, we must always strive to learn more and share that knowledge with the rest of the world. And we must do so with the integrity and professionalism that exemplifies our academic heritage. I would like to end this by saying I've always taken non-traditional approaches to life. I guess I've done what you say, buck the system with what's considered the norm. So it's fitting that I'm now and forever an Ole Miss rebel, and I'm very proud of that.
That's kind of a hard speech to follow up with. So I'm going to keep this one short and simple. Like most grad students, I was pretty eager to start graduate school, but after months of failed experiments, I felt like grad school wasn't for me. So I turned to a senior grad student for advice, and I asked her if it gets better. It has to get better. And her response was, no, it doesn't. As you can imagine, that was not the response I was hoping for. Fortunately for me, she was wrong. It did get better. With each failure, I gained knowledge. I would turn back to the literature and start over again. Sometimes I found success, and other times dead ends. Saying I don't know isn't a solution. It's just the first step. You have to find out what you don't know and work like a dog to learn. I realized I may not have the most talent. What I lacked in talent, I made it for with discipline. With that being said, I would like to thank my mother, Debbie Harris, and my father, Paul Harris, for instilling that discipline in me. I would also like to thank my siblings for support during all the tough times in grad school. I would also like to thank the undergrads that have helped me collect data throughout graduate school. You have made my grad experience filled with joy, excitement, and friendship that most grad students aren't lucky enough to have. I also want to express my deepest gratitude to my mentor, Dr. Kenneth J. Sufka. Dr. Sufka has had my back following each failure and was there to celebrate each success. He has taught me that graduate school is more than just receiving a degree, it's a journey. Perhaps the best moments I've had with him would be analyzing data following a month-long experiment. It was in those moments that only he and I knew something that no one else in the world knew, our contribution to science. Thank you, Dr. Sufka, for teaching me that research is more than just a science and a degree. It's a journey made up of moments that will enrich my life for forever. Thank you for letting me give you a little glimpse into my time here at Ole Miss, and it has been an honor to be your class marshal. Thank you.
Thank you for those inspiring remarks. I would like to talk briefly about the meaning of the doctoral degree that you will be receiving tonight. I will begin with some history of the doctorate and graduate education in the United States. In 1857, Columbia University admitted students to the first master's degree course in the country. Yale University went further, granting the first PhD in the USA in 1872. 4 years later, the Graduate School of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the first in the country, opened at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. This became the model for advanced study and training nationwide for over a century to come. Here at the University of Mississippi, the graduate school was formally organized in 1927, and the faculty articulated the aims and ends of graduate education, from which I quote, "Graduate study implies more than the acquisition of knowledge under competent instruction. The doctoral candidate should aspire to the degree of knowledge of a given subject in order to make a contribution that is of original and independent value." These words were written 90 years ago and still describe graduate education. That is, all of you are not simply conveyors of knowledge, but in fact, creators of new knowledge that has the potential to benefit your field and society at large. Holders of a doctoral degree carry with them certain expectations, which I point out as I challenge to you. These expectations are that you will become a contributor to your discipline and society by becoming a teacher, a researcher, an innovator, a highly skilled professional, or a creator of products, whether the product be artistic or technical, that will enrich your own life and the lives of others. Doctoral education at the University of Mississippi is marked by its breadth of fields and its diversity. This richness is symbolized by the pageantry of the hooding process, which dates back to the 12th century. The robes and hoods initially had a functional role of keeping 12th century scholars warm and dry in the drafty and damp monasteries and libraries of the medieval European universities. The style and pattern of the hoods was settled in the course of the 13th to 14th centuries when it was adopted by monks, clergy, and university students. The hooding itself by the mentor was the means of welcoming the novice into the brotherhood. Today, the hooding is a symbolic ritual in which the advisor initiates the student into the highest order of scholars, and the color of the hoods represent different degrees in universities. The hood of the PhD is edged in blue velvet. The hood of someone with an EdD degree is edged in light blue velvet. The silk lining of the hood reflects the university granting the degree. The colors of the University of Mississippi are a blue chevron on a field of red. These colors were introduced by Professor Alexander Bondurant, who was the first dean of the graduate school. The sleeves of doctoral robes are trimmed with 3 black velvet bars to indicate the depth of achievement required for a doctorate. You will notice that our faculty members wear hoods with many different colors, representing the universities from which they received their degrees. I now call forward for hooding the 2016-17 class of doctorates of the University of Mississippi, along with their faculty advisors. Dr. Maurice Eftink, Associate Provost Emeritus, will assist by reading the names of doctoral candidates, their advisors, and dissertation titles. As names are read, I ask that you hold applause until all have been hooded so that names can be clearly heard.
Matthew John Abbott, receiving a PhD in biological sciences, will be hooded by Dr. Stephen Brewer for a dissertation entitled Conditions Responsible for the Success of Carnivorous Plants in Nutrient-Poor Wetlands. Bethany Jane Aina, receiving a PhD in psychology and being hooded by Dr. John Young for a dissertation entitled Meaning in Life as a Moderator of Resilience in Traumatic Stress, a study of the protective factors and sex differences in the sample of Mississippi coastal residents seeking mental health services after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Natalia Magdalena Akins, receiving a PhD in English, being hooded by Dr. Catherine McKee for a dissertation entitled Breaking the Bonds, the Pull of the Plantation Nation in the U.S. South, Latin America, and the Caribbean, 1831 to 1934. Alana Tanya Alexander, receiving a PhD in music and being hooded by Dr. Alan Spurgeon for a dissertation entitled A Historical Perspective of the Segregated High Schools in Cleveland, Mississippi, as seen through the band and choir programs, 1848 to present. Saeed Arab, receiving a PhD in geological engineering and being hooded by Dr. Greg Eason for a dissertation entitled Soil Moisture Estimation Using Optical and Microwave Remote Sensing. Brittany Nielsen Avila, receiving a PhD in psychology and being hooded by Dr. Stephanie Miller for a dissertation entitled Creating Divergence, Understanding the Fourth Grade Slump in Creativity Through Language, Executive Function, and Mindset. Sai Prachitan Balguri, receiving a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, being hooded by Dr. Sumayajit Majumdar for a dissertation entitled Lipid-Based Frameworks and Topical Ocular Inserts for the Delivery of Small Molecule Therapeutics to the Posterior Segment of the Eye. John Mark Kane, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Douglas Davis for a dissertation entitled High School Contextual Variables and ACT Scores. Jonathan Daigle, receiving a PhD in business administration and being hooded by Dr. Kathleen Fuller for a dissertation entitled 3 Essays on Private Market Interactions. Andres Felipe Diaz Lopez, receiving a PhD in business administration, will be hooded by Dr. Brian Reithel for a dissertation entitled Are You Ready? A Proposed Framework for the Assessment of Digital Forensic Readiness. Latanya Latrice Dixon, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Rose Susan Bartee for a dissertation entitled Navigating the Role of Curricular Pathways and School Controls or School Contracts in Post-Secondary Outcomes in STEM for Students of Color. Isoi Igabor, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Ellen Foster for a PhD for a dissertation entitled Phenomenographic Study of Student Engagement Using GIS Story Maps in the 8th Grade Social Studies Classroom. Andrea Flores, receiving a PhD in psychology and being hooded by Dr. Todd Smitherman for a dissertation entitled On the Relationship Between Meaning and Prejudice, Examining Self-Transcendence and Value Behavior Consistency in a Sample of Colleges. Dr. Joshua Fulweiler, receiving a PhD in psychology and being hooded by Dr. John Young for a dissertation entitled Ask Your Doctor About Exposure Therapy, Direct-to-Consumer Marketing of Empirically Supported Psychological Treatments for Anxiety. Tisha LaFay Brown Gates, receiving a PhD in engineering science and being hooded by Dr. Feng Wang for a dissertation entitled On Connectivity, Coverage, and Network Optimization in Wireless Video Sensor Networks for 3D Indoor Monitoring. Jacob Richard Dovin, receiving a PhD in Health and Kinesiology and being hooded by Dr. Jay Garner for a dissertation entitled A Kinematic Comparison of Shoulder and Elbow Dynamics Influenced by the Shoe Surface Interface in Youth and Adolescent Baseball Pitchers. Justin Andrew Guerin, receiving a PhD in Education and being hooded by Dr. Douglas Davis for a dissertation entitled A Case Study Analysis and Investigation of the Construct Validity of the 2016 Mississippi Statewide Accountability System. Todd Garner Griffith, receiving a PhD in Business Administration, will be hooded by Dr. Robert Van Ness for a dissertation entitled Order Execution Quality in Equity Options Markets. Jared Paul Grigg, receiving a PhD in psychology, will be hooded by Dr. Thomas Lombardo for a dissertation entitled PTSD Personalities, Resilience, and the 5 Cognitive Distortive Themes of Cognitive Processing Therapy. Joel Andrew Haino, receiving a PhD in political science and being hooded by Dr. Connor Dowling for a dissertation entitled Moral Psychology and Political Campaigns. Fletcher Hargaz, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Rose Susan Bartee for a dissertation entitled The Impact of Pre-Kindergarten Programs on Student Achievement in Mississippi Elementary Schools. Melisha Hart Simmons, receiving a PhD in mathematics and being hooded by Dr. Talmadge James Reed for a dissertation entitled The Element Spectrum of a Matroid. James Hennigan, receiving a PhD in mathematics and being hooded by Dr. Erwin Mina Diaz for a dissertation entitled Asymptotic Properties of Polynomial Orthogonal over Multiple Connected Domains. Frederick Hickman, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Douglas Davis for a dissertation entitled The Creation of Choctaw Central High School, a qualitative review of the lived experience. Barry Hudak, receiving a PhD in English and being hooded by Dr. Jay Watson for a dissertation entitled Book of Empire, the Political Bible of U.S. Modernism. Travis Jaquez, receiving a PhD in history and being hooded by Dr. John Neff for a dissertation entitled Revolutionary Fathers, Republican Fatherhood and the American Revolution and Early Republic, 1763 through 1814. Choyan Lahiri, receiving a PhD in engineering science, will be hooded by Dr. Greg Davidson for a dissertation entitled Influence of Water Depth on Wetland Subsurface Sediment Chemistry and Tree Growth. Antwain Hannibal Leach, receiving a PhD in political science and being hooded by Dr. Jonathan Winborn for a dissertation entitled Social Links Abroad, the Role of Social Identity Theory in the Formation of Public Opinion Towards U.S. Foreign Policy. Christina Dawn Livingston, receiving an EDD in education, will be hooded by Dr. Lane Roy Gaucher for a dissertation entitled The Effects of Closed Caption Television on the Oral Reading Fluency of Low Social Economic Second Grade Students. Jennifer Austin Main, receiving a PhD in counselor education, will be hooded by Dr. Suzanne Duggar for a dissertation entitled Understanding Child-Centered Canine Assisted Play Therapy, a Qualitative Collective Case Study. Mahima Manchanda, receiving a PhD in history and being hooded by Dr. Susan Grazel for a dissertation entitled Experiencing Girlhood, Reconstructing Age and Sexual Maturity in Colonial Punjab. Sydney Manley, receiving a PhD in accountancy and being hooded by Dr. Dale Flesher for a dissertation entitled Public Firm Structure and Managerial Ability, an Examination of Financial Statement Quality. Benita Lenoza Moretti, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Dennis Bunch for a dissertation entitled Identifying Predictors of New Teacher Retention. David Ross Marshall, receiving a PhD in Business Administration, will be hooded by Dr. Walter Davis for a dissertation entitled Entrepreneurship Inside and Out, 3 essays exploring the interplay between hybrid entrepreneurs and their organizational employee roles. Brianna Kylie Morgan, receiving a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, will be hooded by Dr. Tracy Brooks for a dissertation entitled G quadruplexes as molecular targets for transcriptional control. Sheila Yvette Meadows Morgan, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Rosemary Oliphant Ingram for a dissertation entitled Cultural Bias in English Language Arts Curriculum and its Effect on African American and Spanish-Speaking English Language Learners. Lindsay Cargile Noggle, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Erwin Mina Diaz for a dissertation entitled Orthogonal Polynomials on an Arc of the Unit Circle with Respect to a Generalized Jacobi Weight, a Riemann-Hilbert Method Approach. Cameron Duncan Nicole, receiving a PhD in Business Administration, will be hooded by Dr. Robert Van Ness for a dissertation entitled A Little Difference Makes a Big Difference, Essays on the Link Between Top Management Team Traits and Strategic Marketing Decisions. Hector Okada da Silva, receiving a PhD in Physics and being hooded by Dr. Emmanuel Berti for a dissertation entitled Compact Objects in Relativistic Theories of Gravity. Roderick Lytle Payne, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Douglas Davis for a dissertation entitled The Relationship of Gender of the Principal and Teacher Perception of the School Climate on the Suspension and Expulsion Rates of High School Minority Students. Kelly Reed Peck, receiving a PhD in psychology and being hooded by Dr. Todd Smitherman for a dissertation entitled Factors Associated with Medication Overuse Headache in Patients Seeking Treatment for Primary Headache. Avance Pittman Jr., receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Rose Susan Bartee for a dissertation entitled The Relationship Between the Mississippi Adequate Education Program and Student Achievement in Mississippi Schools. James Chadwick Robertson, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. William Sumrall for a dissertation entitled Advancement of Understanding in Physical Science and Reduction of Mathematical Anxiety through the Use of Supplemental Mathematics Material. Newman Christopher Robertson, receiving a PhD in education and being hooded by Dr. Rose Susan Bartee for a dissertation entitled Principal Preparedness for Crisis Management in Urban High Schools. Walter Thomas Ruff, Jr., receiving a PhD in psychology, will be hooded by Dr. Alan Gross for a dissertation entitled Sex-Related Alcohol Expectancies and Perceptions of Alcohol Involvement and Non-Alcohol Sexual Assault Depictions. Yong Lee Song, receiving a PhD in mathematics and being hooded by Dr. Halen Song for a dissertation entitled Memory Properties of Transformations of Linear Processes and Symmetric Gini Correlation. Kartik Prakash Shirur, receiving a PhD in biological sciences, will be hooded by Dr. Bryce Noonan for a dissertation entitled Biochemical Composition of Caribbean Gorgonian Corals and Their Symbiosis Under Ambient and Stressful Conditions. Kimberly Smith Waller, receiving an EDD in education, will be hooded by Dr. Joel Amadon for a dissertation entitled Teachers' Perceptions of School Leaders' Behaviors and the Relationship to Student Growth and Achievement. James Samuel Strickland, receiving a PhD in counselor education, will be hooded by Dr. Suzanne Duggar for a dissertation entitled The Impact of Spiritual Maturity on Clinical Mental Counseling Students' Intentions to Engage in Social Justice Advocacy. Casey Rose Terrell, receiving a PhD in counselor education, to be hooded by Suzanne Duggar for a dissertation entitled Exploring the Relationship Among Minority Stress, Internalized Homophobia, Mental Health Concerns, Social Support, and Relationship Satisfaction in Female Same-Sex Couples. Paula Wilbanks Tharp, receiving a PhD in education, will be hooded by Dr. Dennis Bunch for a dissertation entitled Improvement Capacity in Mississippi Schools, a comparison between improving schools and struggling schools with high needs. Valencia Collins Thevenin, receiving a PhD in music, will be hooded by Dr. Alan Spurgeon for a dissertation entitled Virginia Jean Rittenhouse, The History and Organization of the New England Youth Ensemble. Barbara Ann Trevelli Bowen, receiving an EDD in education, will be hooded by Dr. Stacy Holmes for a dissertation entitled The Impact Literacy Coaches Have on Teacher Competency to Increase Literacy Levels for Kindergarten through Third Grade Students in Mississippi's Lower Performing Schools. Isadora Jean Wagner, receiving a PhD in English and being hooded by Dr. Jay Watson for a dissertation entitled The Regendering of America, Women's Representations in Vietnam War Literature. David Emery Womble, receiving a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences and being hooded by Dr. Donna Weststrom for a dissertation entitled The Role of Brand Name Fluency, a Pharmaceutical Marketing Perspective. Xiaohe Wang, receiving a PhD in mathematics and being hooded by Dr. Bing Wei, for a dissertation entitled On Topological Indices and Domination Numbers of Graphs. Trinisha Tali Weekly, receiving an EDD in education and being hooded by Dr. Angela Rutherford for a dissertation entitled The Impact of Word Study Intervention Strategies on Students' Measures of Reading Comprehension and Fluency. Michael Andrew Weiss, receiving a PhD in Health and Kinesiology and being hooded by Dr. Allison Ford Wade for a dissertation entitled The Relationship Between Caring for Individuals Diagnosed with Prader-Willi Syndrome and Caregiver Stress. Sirhat Yildiz, receiving a PhD in Business Administration and being hooded by Doctors Bonnie Van Ness and Robert Van Ness, just Bonnie Van Ness, for a dissertation entitled Information in Trades, Stock Return Synchronicity, and Market Liquidity in the U.S. Financial Markets. And finally, we have our two class marshals. Hannah Marie Harris, receiving a PhD in psychology and being hooded by Dr. Ken Sufka for a dissertation entitled Cannabidiol Monoval Monohemisuccinate Modulation of Oxycodone Reward and Analgesia. And last but not least, Timothy John Colston, receiving a PhD in biological sciences and being hooded by Dr. Bryce Noonan for a dissertation entitled The Reptile Gut Microbiome, Its Role in Host Evolution and Community Assembly.
Please join me in congratulating all of our newly hooded graduates. Graduate students play an important part in the education of our undergraduate students, even though their principal purpose for being at the university is that they are students themselves. The Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, along with the Graduate School, established an award to recognize the contributions of graduate instructors to our educational enterprise. I call to the podium Dr. Johnny Lott, Director Emeritus of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, to introduce the winner. Dr. Lott?
The Graduate Instructor Teaching Award is tonight being presented for the 9th time. Established in 2008 when I was director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, the award is funded by private donations with support from the graduate school, and it recognizes the outstanding teaching conducted by graduate students. Their work on this campus is vital to the success of the university as they work with many students in virtually all fields. Nominees are solicited from across campus, and the award has been given to those in many different fields. Tonight's awardee is Ms. Rebecca Nance, a doctoral student working on her dissertation in mathematics education in the School of Education. Her nominator, Dr. Joel Amadon, wrote, "Ms. Nance's experience as an elementary teacher, as well as her experience providing extensive professional development for the Center for Mathematics and Science Education, has provided her the ideal preparation to teach pre-service teachers in our program. Her classes are perfectly balanced between providing information and allowing her students the space and time to engage in problems of practice associated with teaching." Dr. Amadon's comments were echoed from Ms. Kelsey Horn's recommending later. Ms. Horn is a student. As her student, I have observed Ms. Nance's passion for teacher education, particularly in mathematics. She impresses the importance of building a deep conceptual understanding of math on her students. She does so by creating learning situations that challenge us to consider math from an elementary student's perspective. Ultimately, Ms. Nance's teaching practices integrate meaningful classroom experiences and thoughtful reflection to create genuine, lasting understanding. Ms. Nance also has a remarkable gift for building relationships with her students. Her understanding attitude and supportive nature are indispensable. A sincere regard for her students is what sets Ms. Nance apart in her efficacy as a teacher. Without further ado, I ask Ms. Nance to come forward for the presentation of the Golden Apple Trophy and a check for $1,000 to use as she works to complete her program of studies. Congratulations, Becky.
An important goal of the graduate school at the University of Mississippi is to promote diversity in our student body and academic programs. The university is proud of the work that faculty and programs do to provide a supportive environment for all graduate students. The graduate school, working with leaders of the Graduate Student Council, several years ago received a national award for past efforts and planned future efforts in creating an inclusive environment for graduate education. In our proposal for this award, we described our plan to recognize annually an individual or program that best exemplifies the ideals of enhancing inclusiveness in graduate education. I call to the podium Dr. Donald Cole, Assistant Provost and Associate Professor of Mathematics, to introduce this year's award winners.
This year's selection committee chose to honor both a departmental program as well as an individual for their work in making our institution a more inclusive environment. I will ask Dr. Dan O'Sullivan from the Department of Modern Languages to come forward to receive this award for his department. And simultaneously, I would ask Dr. Lucille Labuda from the Department of Physics to come forward and receive this award for individual and dedicated work toward this end. As they approach, I would like for Provost Wilkins and Interim Graduate School Dean Wyatt and Dean Emeritus Dr. Maurice Epting to receive these individuals to come forth. In its application to the Department of Modern Languages, noted that, quote, its efforts to cross borders to recruit other students and in other countries and states in order to find candidates who can, quote, provide different perspectives in graduate courses, boasting a developmental average of age, gender, ethnicity, non-traditionalism, and internationalism exceeding that of the university. The Modern Language Department significantly adds to the University's promotion of global citizenship and cultural competency. Modern languages understand that learning does not just occur in the classroom, so the department offers several opportunities for students to engage in mentored participation in their subject area in real-world situations. These include chronologizing logistic diversity in the South, as well as creating public service messaging about linguistic diversity across the campus. The Modern Language Department graduate curriculum, regardless of emphasis, prepares students for leadership, citizenship, and stewardship in a global, diverse economy. This diverse student bodies allows professors, students to experience multiple voices as they explore language, literature, and culture. Moreover, the department holds the university's creed to affirm its academic excellence and promotes inclusion. Indeed, the mission of promoting multilingual and cross-cultural awareness in the Department of Modern Languages, actively crafts an inclusive environment for all of its graduate students. Dan, I tried to look up the word congratulation in one of the 10 different languages that your department provides, and I was unsuccessful, so you'll have to take congratulations, y'all, old Southern style. Dr. Lucille Labuda is an associate professor of physics and astronomy. Her nominating letter advocates her as an advocate for minorities, investing her time and energy in encouraging, mentoring, and nurturing female and minority graduate students. And numerous examples are cited as well. She has directed several female minority undergraduates in honors, summer, and senior research projects. And though she has been involved in the National Science Foundation Increasing Minority Access to Graduate Education program at the university. She participated in the Alliance for Graduate Education in Mississippi Summer Research Institute program as a mentor for minority students. She was a PI for a successful proposal of the American Physical Society to host the 2015 Conference for Undergraduate Women in Physics. This conference provided an occasion for which I will always remember. Cecile, as I was sitting in that room with all of those talented female physicists from all around the world at the University of Mississippi. This was a proud moment for me, not to mention my excitement of being the only male in the room. So Lucille, congratulations on receiving this award, and thank you for all the diversity work that you do for the university. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2017 winner of the Graduate School Diversity Award, Dr. Lucille Labuda and Dr. Dan O'Sullivan.
None of our graduates would be here today without the efforts of our dedicated graduate faculty. To recognize the importance of their work, we established an award for excellence in graduate teaching and mentoring. In identifying the award recipient, the committee evaluates the nominee's impact on graduate students, excellence in supervision of student research or professional practice, excellence in graduate classroom instruction, and other contributions to improved instruction, including influence on the graduate curriculum. This year's recipient has been a member of the University of Mississippi's graduate faculty for 17 years. During his time here, he has directed the dissertations of 17 doctoral students with 4 more in progress and 10 master's theses. And remarkably, 8 of his former students hold faculty positions. He is an international presence in his discipline, yet he ensures that his graduate students are included at the center of his research. For example, he has published 17 peer-reviewed manuscripts, 19 book chapters, and 2 books with graduate student co-authors. and very often the student has the role of lead author. Additionally, he has given at least 145 conference presentations that included graduate student co-authors. He goes above and beyond to ensure that his students are progressing towards their own personal and professional goals. One current student says, his lab is a community where everyone takes care of each other and the lab fosters an environment that is conducive for people to reach their highest potential. The guidance and direction I have received from him has been transformational and has freed me up to inhabit multiple identities with comfort, all the while having a fulfilling and enriching learning experience at the university. A former student writes, when he teaches a course, it is never a mere recitation of the material with students left to their own devices for instruction. He gets in the trenches with you. He wades through the material alongside of you, and while he moves deftly, he paces himself so that students can follow alongside him. He gave me the skills to earn my PhD, but he gave much more than merely this. He gave me permission to follow my dreams, encouraged me to try again when failure knocked on my door, and showed me the way forward when I doubted myself. I know as a certainty that I would not have my PhD without his support, guidance, and mentorship. Another former student writes, he bet on me when most people wouldn't have. You see, he doesn't just mentor students in research. He mentors his students to be the best they can be in the paths they choose. He believes in possibilities, which is now something that guides me in my own mentoring as a professor. I am eternally grateful for him for going above and beyond with me, making the impossible possible. And from another former student, his standards are terrifically high, which when matched with his tireless support he offers, creates the context for his students to excel far beyond their own expectations. The experience he provided to me and my classmates prepared us to position ourselves, challenge ourselves, and nurture ourselves into the professors, the scientists, the therapists, the administrators, the colleagues, and the people we long to be. In the recipient's personal teaching statement, he says, to this day, I feel privileged to breathe the air on a college campus. I feel privileged to be a member of the academy. And even after all these years, I have a fire in my belly to transmit what I found. I think it is safe to say that the University of Mississippi is privileged to have Dr. Kelly Wilson, Professor of Psychology, as a faculty member, and it gives me great pleasure indeed to give him this award for excellence in graduate teaching and mentoring. Dr. Wilson, please come forward. Before we conclude this evening's ceremony, I wish to thank the graduate school staff lurking around here somewhere. Anyone still here, wave? Without them, we really would not have a ceremony tonight. Let me just make that clear. I also would like to thank the Faculty Brass Quintet, John Schuslin and Stanley Friedman on trumpet, Robert Gilbert on horn, Mika Everett on trombone, and Joseph Selsmanberger on tuba, who set the tone for the evening. I remind you that the morning commencement ceremony will be held at 9 a.m. in the Grove. You should probably get there early. The new doctorates are encouraged to proudly wear their hoods and sit front and center in the audience. Will the doctoral class of 2016-2017 please rise and face the audience? Faculty, Okay, let's continue to congratulate the graduates as they process to the lobby. We are adjourned.